Yep. So coming back to the point, so today we will see a little bit about the projects which you are supposed to do. Okay. The first part of the project is create a relation model or a database scheme for the ER model which is there. Okay. So this is the ER model which we already discussed in the first week. So for that you need to create a relation model using the tools which are mentioned in the first page of the course. These are some of the tools. Mostly you can use Lucid Chart or VCO, which will be handy. Or if you are familiar with some other tool, you can still use it. So that is the first point. The second one is the integrity constraint. Okay. This this is nothing but, for example, we have project, customer, department, and employees. Okay. We will take employee and project for this scenario. Employee has 10 employee records in the table and project has 5 projects. Okay, that is a scenario. And each project will be worked by 2 employees. Okay, 5 project, 10 employees. So for example, employee 1, employee 2 is working on project 1. Okay, all of a sudden employee 1 has resigned from the company. Okay, but his record will be in employee table project, and if he is part of some user group, it will be there. So what exactly you have to do is, if that particular user has been deleted, particular employee has been deleted from the employee table, if he has been deleted, his record should be deleted from the user group as well as the project which is associated with. Okay. Usually, if you don't add this on update or on delete constraint, what happens is, if you think employee one is out of the organization, you have to delete from this table, you have to delete from this table, you have to delete from this table. So in order to avoid this multiple deletion, you are cascading all the deletion in a single state, a single thing. So when you are creating a table, you have to see what are the foreign keys which will be associated with these two tables. For example, work starting date and employee ID can be foreign key for the project. Okay. So employee ID, whenever you delete it, it has to delete in the project also. So when you are creating a foreign key, you have to give foreign key employee ID of which table, employee table, and the constraint is on delete cascade or on update cascade, something like that. So that is a basic thing of this thing. So they have already given for 4 tables you can create this constraint. Okay, project, customer, user group, and employee. So this project is basically, you have to write your justification, most part of it, and you have to give a SQL snippet or SQL code in between so that it will be understandable. Partitioning, anyway, we have already seen what exactly we need to do. So based on the assignment, you can just follow that same thing. And the user access is also the same thing. So if, for example, 1 and 2 works on a project 1, so that users will have to access only for the project 1. It should not have an access for the other project. So you have to use row partitioning or row accessing or something. And management of values, so this one is pretty straightforward. Define default values. It is nothing but what we can say. For example, employee ID is one column where you don't have to give employee ID or something, or we can consider timestamp. For example, if you are updating some data, that data should be updated automatically by the default value. Maybe we can say default value is the current time of it. So whenever you update the table, it can be of the default value. Or you can have for this example, okay, if you consider department, there are different departments. If you are not sure about which department he is, you can just give a default like he's a worker or something. So that is one of the case for default. Check constraint is, again, we have already seen. So you have to give some kind of conditions. For example, for email ID, you can have a constraint like it has to end with at Gmail or at some dot coms. So that can be one of the constraint. And other thing, maybe the start date should not be less than the current date or something. That can be one of the constraint. So that is some kind of checks you are keeping for that particular column or a table. And then the finally the null value. So it is basically like you don't have to allow any null values to be in the table. So for example, in this case, you can see employee should not have his name as a null value. So whenever you are entering a data into the database, employee as an employee detail, you should have employee ID, his email, and name as a compulsory one kind of a thing, so that you can do triggers. We have seen already, you can consider whatever scenario you want and create a trigger which involves maybe multiple tables, not single table. And trigger graph is nothing but creating a diagrammatic representation. So basically, if you are for example, if you are what we can consider. Okay, for example, I am saying in a project only two people has to work. Okay, so if I try to enter an employee detail and it's assigning to the same project which already has two people, then my trigger should have a response like, okay, you should not add more than two people into the project or something. So the entire process you have to give us a graph, so what exactly your trigger will do kind of a thing. And 7 and 8 is almost theory. It's nothing you have to, I mean, you have to implement in your project or something. It's kind of a theoretical understanding of security issues and measures and the backups and things. So straightforward security issues, I would say, based on the permissions. For example, you might have created a user, but he might not have a permission. That can be a security issue. And version mismatch, SQL injection mismatch. I mean, there are a lot of issues. You can just read about it and you can write something which will be similar to that. Backup and recovery and disaster plan is similar to that. There are, I mean, when I was working in the project, we used to have a disaster recovery activity every year, actually. So, as I said, we used to work with a lot of databases. I mean, primary, secondary, and the disaster recovery database. So, disaster recovery database will be like in sleep always for entire year. So, whatever, I mean, we have an application. So, whatever data it is getting, it will be updated to the primary database as expected. Okay. After that, it will be transferred to the secondary database. Okay. We have the synonyms. Through synonyms, it will be transferred to the secondary database. And also, whatever the primary data it is having, it will be transferred to the disaster recovery database also. So basically, we are transferring the real-time database in all the three database. Why we are doing it? Because our database server is in US, okay, and our secondary database server was in UK, and our disaster recovery database was in somewhere around China or something. So it is basically like, for example, typical hypothetical scenario. For example, there is a huge flood in US. Okay, and all of a sudden the database or data lake got swamped. So the entire data will get lost, right? So that is one of the reason why we have three different database. So natural disaster is one of the disaster possibility you can consider, and malware attack you can consider, like cyber security threats. For example, if your database can be affected by some kind of what hackers or something, then how do you work on it kind of a thing. There are a lot of examples for it. So real time, I would say the disaster, natural disaster, or some kind of power loss or connectivity lost, because we usually face during our working with the project actually. So at times the primary database we will not be able to connect, because then connection to the American servers might get off due to some reason, I mean the network issues or something. During that time we used to reconnect our database to the secondary as a primary, and we used to work with the UK database. So those are some of the scenarios you might consider to do your project. And for your homework, I have received, I mean, few mails, not that much, but based on that, for procedures, triggers, and function, the thing is all three will have a almost similar syntax. Okay. But the only differentiator is the SQL part which you are writing inside. Okay. Let me open pgadmin and let me open this and put the basic syntax and show you. So what I would suggest is don't start writing the procedure or a trigger or a function directly. Try to formulate the SQL query part, which is the main thing, and then write the procedure or trigger or a function. So let it open. So basically what you are trying to do, you are trying to create procedure or a trigger, everything. Okay, then what you are saying, you are giving the condition. If it is a trigger, you are saying begin. If it is a table, you are saying return whatever table or a query or whatever. Then what you are trying to say, you are trying to say what something like language or something, language, some PLP, whatever it is given, PLPG SQL. Then you are writing begin and end. So whatever you are trying to do for trigger, function, and procedure, your SQL part, whether it's update, whether it can be a select, whether it can be whatever delete, whatever you do, it will be within these two brackets. So
We
first,
can't see what you're typing, so.
okay, sorry. Yep. Can you see?
Yes.
So basically what I was trying to say is, so whenever you create a procedure or trigger, almost the syntax is similar. Okay. And whatever you write in between these two matters. That is the main logic you are trying to address. So what I would suggest is whenever you have a trigger or a function or a procedure, it doesn't matter. Try to formulate the query first. So for example, you will write all the query in between begin and end, update or select or whatever. After that, test it with your table. Okay. Then you can just add your bits and pieces. You can just add the create procedure statement and whatever it is there on top and the end statement at the bottom. So when you do the SQL part first, you will understand whether your syntax is wrong, whether your query is wrong or something. But if you create a trigger or a procedure, it will just create it because it will not check whether your query works or something. It will just create the trigger or a procedure. Then when you are testing, you will find some issue like, okay, it is not creating. Then you have to drop the trigger and procedure, or you have to alter the procedure. Then you need to create it again and again and again. So, but if you create a SQL query, it will be way more simpler than creating this SQL and stuff. So I would suggest you guys to do that before creating this procedure or a trigger or a function. So apart from that, I guess pretty much everybody is doing okay. And for the project, these are my suggestions or things you have to consider. So, do you guys have any questions or comments here regarding this? Okay, I guess silence is no doubts. So now actually we will go one by one and we will see what issues individually we have. So I will call you through Teams, okay? And India, if you don't have any doubts, you can stay still and you can think of if you have any doubts, you can ask. Otherwise, I will call one by one so that we can have a Teams discussion and we can see what issues you are facing. Okay? Is that-